Hey Authority Hackers, welcome to this week's podcast episode. So I know a lot of you guys are interested in building websites, but not a lot of you are very interested in the beginning phases of building a website, which tend to be a lot of work for very little action, very little ranking, and very little revenue, to be honest. And so one way to skip these first 1 to 2 years of the life of an authority site is to actually just buy one that exists already, that is ranking for some keywords, makes maybe some money, but it's not necessarily the most important. It's mostly the age you're buying, some of the links, etc., so that you can get going, get some links, get some content, and get the results really quickly. The problem is that the marketplace is sometimes a little bit deceiving, and you need to be very careful when you buy a website to make sure you're buying exactly what you think you're buying. And in this episode, we're going to be talking about exactly that. We're going to be talking about what you need to look for when you're buying a domain, when you're buying a website, what are the common tricks that might be played on you, or things that you might just be missing when you're buying a website, as well as share our personal opinions of whether we buy some websites with some attributes or some others. So let's get started and enjoy this episode. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Authority Hacker podcast. In today's episode, we are going to be talking about 7 things to look out when buying a website. So a lot of people decide to not start a website from scratch, but rather buy a website, mostly because usually the first few years of a website are fairly uneventful. Like they tend to take lots of work and you don't really get much money, much return. You don't rank very high. Initially, the first year, I tend to tell people that you make more money working at McDonald's. And I think that is a good analogy to like tell you it's not a get rich quick method, but after that, then it tends to be better. So one way people skip that is they buy websites. But the market of buying and selling websites is not maybe as transparent as we would like it to be. And when you are a buyer, especially if you're a first-time buyer, especially if you've never built websites before, if you don't have much experience running an established website, you could make a lot of mistakes that end up in you buying the wrong website. And we wanted to make that podcast for you guys to avoid that. It's not worse than like buying a house. It's the same when people buy a house, right? People can also buy the wrong house, buy a house with defects, it's been hidden by the seller, whatever. Basically same thing here. So I got Mark here with me today. How's it going, Mark?
Going good.
The smoothest how's it going transition ever. So let's just jump into this. I don't want to go on side stories or anything now. I just want to get going onto that. I think the first thing that I would question is the way sites are valued. So, we're going to sound old again, but when we started in this market, sites would be sold for like around 20 times monthly revenue, something like this.
Monthly profit.
Monthly profit, yeah. Today, I actually, before we prepared this podcast, we always go and check the temperature of the market, etc. I went on Empire Flippers and FE International, and it seems to be that 40 to 50 times revenue, not profit, is kind of like the way sites are being valued these days, which is interesting because it's kind of like the peak of what it's been. I haven't seen 60x or something very much for content sites yet. We see more than that even for SaaS products, but for content sites, not so much. To give you an example of a listing I was looking at, I was on Empire Flippers. It is a site that is mostly monetized by ads in the sports and fitness niche, and the multiple is 52x. So it's making $30,000 per month. It was created in 2019, and it's on sale at $1,548,000 for that site, which is quite interesting because I'm looking at this and comparing it to other forms of investment, right? So apart from real estate, in the current state of the economy at the time at which we're recording, which is August 2022 right now, a lot of other investment assets have peaked and went down a little bit. So like nothing, the S&P 500 is not at the peak of value anymore. A lot of like the bond stuff is not, etc. Pretty much everything. So like the P/E ratio of S&P 500 went from 37 at the peak to 21 right now. Crypto markets cooled down a lot as well. Like we're definitely not at that peak anymore. Yet the multiple for websites is at the highest it's ever been. And it's making me ask questions as to like, has the value of websites increased, or has the market not yet adapted to maybe what more established investment assets have been going towards in the last few months at least? I
think there's another interesting dynamic that even before the whole market crash, was playing out, and it was affecting valuations a lot. And that's just the nature of the market being quite broker centric. So when you want to sell a site, there's typically a handful of top tier brokers and plenty of smaller ones beneath that you'll go to. And the way that they can win your business, imagine you go to 3 brokers and you get 3 valuations. You're most likely going to go with the one who gives you the highest price. Yeah, we reckon we can sell your site for $1 million. If the others are like 700, 600K, you're probably going to go with the one that reckons they can get it for $1 million. And that's just the nature of the market. That's not anyone trying to, deceive you or anything, but it means that you are then in a position where brokers are incentivized to give you a higher than realistic valuation, and then start walking things back after you come on board and you sign up for 6-month exclusivity of listing. And this is the same concept which happens a lot in big boy finance world when you have companies doing IPOs and they're looking for an investment bank to help take them public. They always overpromise and then start walking back, say, oh, well, actually, because your business is like this, it's only worth this, or it's only worth this. I spoke to someone who sold their site fairly recently, towards the end of last year, and it was on the market for, I think, 9 months. And the reason being is that I think he got promised quite a high valuation initially. And I remember at the time he asked me about it, and I said, I don't think you'll get that for it. But he was very much sort of drawn by that price. And then over time, as nobody was interested, they started sort of knocking it down. And when it got to a more realistic multiple, I think in the sort of mid 40s, then it sold. So I think this concept has been perpetuating in the industry for a while. It's led to this situation where the listing price, or the initial listing price on a lot of these platforms, is very, very high. Just in case maybe someone who doesn't know any better,
a newbie coming in the market, not knowing.
Yeah, so pay very close attention to not only how much it listed at, but if you're speaking to them, like, how much was it initially listed at? When you're buying a home, one of the things you look for is, have they reduced the price of the home? That can give you a lot of indication about maybe all the other buyers saw some problems with it, or maybe it was overvalued, or whatever else. So yeah, pay very close attention to that.
Maybe how long it's been on the market as well. That's usually what I ask when I visit like apartments and stuff.
Exactly.
And it tells you, and usually when you ask that to real estate agents, at least they make a funny face when it's been a while or something. Like, they basically know they're kind of like getting cornered on this. I think it's happening to the site market. It's like maybe your friend sold for like mid 40s, but I would not be surprised if the average was even lower now that the economic situation has gotten worse since the end of last year.
There's a lack of transparency of data, right? With houses in most countries, there's sort of public registers of how much each house sold for, and so you can actually see that data. With sites, all you have is how much were they listed for, and then nothing. You've no idea what the final sale price went for. So it's not very transparent in that sense.
It's not just that, but because interest rates are going up quite fast these days, like, money is more expensive, and usually that means price of big assets like that tend to go down with higher interest rates, just because there's less flowing money in the economy and it's less accessible for other things, so you need to dedicate it properly. But just to finish on that point, I actually made a poll on Twitter. I have no idea who voted. They're not experts or anything necessarily, but it was quite interesting to see that 38.8% of people voted too high, 19.4% of people voted too low, and 41.8%, so the majority voted just right. Which I guess they disagree a little bit with us, even though there's still more too high than too low. Maybe it's too high, but not too high, I guess. That would be my reading in that. Or like people just that have a website for sale voted too low, people who want to buy websites voted too high, and people who don't care voted just right.
I mean that broadly aligns with the sentiment I've heard from just talking to people and in our community and stuff. People are, if they see a good deal or they see a good site at a fair price, they'll go for it. But the general perception is that most of what you see on broker sites, on places like Flippa and
it's
that
not what you pay for,
to be a bit overpriced. It's the off market and the private deal flow in these situations where a lot of the kind of persistent buyers are making their money.
Yeah, I agree. Let's jump on the next point, which is going to be the over dependence on a few pages. And that's kind of like not unique to sites that are for sale. Most websites get most of their traffic from a handful of pages, like 5, 10, 15, 20 pages, something like this. And so when you do the due diligence for a page, I think you need to go hardcore on doing the due diligence for these pages specifically more than the entire website, because that's where most of the money comes from. And the initial way you're going to get your money back is the current revenue of the website. So you need to make sure that this is going to be stable for a while, hopefully at least you make your money back. And after that, you can maybe take more risks, etc. But quite often, Google kind of lags behind what should be ranking and what's ranking. And that's usually when we see these big shuffles in core updates, for example. So like it's quite frequent that a page with much worse content or much lower link metrics still ranks quite well because historically it's done well, even though the competitors have been putting effort into doing something better recently. And so like I would try to catch these situations by going through each page individually, looking at the keywords they rank for, then looking at who else is ranking for. I go in the keyword explorer in Ahrefs, and at the bottom you have this graph of like the evolution of the SERP.
Position
and history, I tend to look at like people who are like slowly climbing up and looking at these pages, making sure that they're not on track to overtake me, especially when you're higher rankings, like when you're top 1 to 3, losing one position. If you go from 1 to 2 or 1 to 3, like you can cut.
It's a big deal.
50%. Yeah, 50% of your income. If that one page was like a big percentage of the site's income, you could be losing like 20, 30% revenue, not from a big core update or something, but just from like that one page being knocked out. And often sites that are being sold are not being worked on as actively as when they're like, a current project of the company that sells them, which means it's more prone to be knocked out by competitors, because if the site's been on the market for 6, 7, 8 months, nobody's really been looking at it as closely as they have before. It's possible that these things happen. So I would be quite careful, but at the same time as you do this, I would like to also look at the top pages that make the most money, and I'd be doing some keyword research as to, is there similar keywords I can write about so that I can expand on that. So like, if you're doing, I don't know, if you're ranking for like best paintball guns, maybe there's no best paintball rifles page or something like this, like something that is very close semantically and like in terms of topic that you can write about, that is also the same format, so that you're very likely to rank high quickly. And you are basically evaluating the risks and the potential upsets of your top pages much more than the rest of the site, I would say, because that's really where the money comes from, and that's really where your ROI is going to come from. So just pay more attention, do pretty much full keyword research and audit for these pages, and then the rest of the site you can put a little bit less work into it. Basically give as much attention as percentage of revenue a page generates for the site, basically.
I would also add to that when you're valuing a site for yourself to say, is it worth me buying it, you really want to look at what they're making based on what they currently rank for, not the kind of aspirational stuff. Because you can come in and say, oh yeah, I could write all these pages and rank for all this, but it might not happen. So don't kind of spend the money with the expectation that it's going to grow. You need to look at what's actually happened so far.
Yeah, I agree. Let's jump on to the next one, and
Okay.
I'll let you take this one.
Yeah, so the next one I want to talk about is hidden or external sources of revenue. And I've heard multiple reports from experienced site buyers who have run into this issue when purchasing a site. Basically, what happens is you look at you go through due diligence. They see they have a ton of organic traffic and some email traffic, referrals, whatever else. And then you look at the revenue and think, oh yeah, okay, all this traffic's generating all this money. Great. But if you don't tie the actual revenue being generated back to specifically to, say, the organic traffic from Google, it could be the case that there's a lot of sales coming through some other hidden source, which is not on the site. I know one person had a situation where they bought a site and there was a ton of sales coming from an external community. And then when the owner, was no longer a part of it, he was no longer a part of that community, sales started to dip quite a lot as well. So they weren't really buying, or the site was valuation was being overinflated by these off-site sales, which didn't continue after the purchase. So you have to be really, really careful of that. Also, there can be cases where the owner has a very strong personal brand. People are following them personally, and unless you work out, a specific deal where you can continue to leverage their presence, or they're going to continue to, help promote in a certain way, you can end up in a situation where, you've just lost a really big source of leads, of sales, of clicks, of whatever else. And it's just very, very difficult to actually foresee that in due diligence, because if you think about an affiliate site, if you look at if you go through any due diligence for a site listed on Empire Flippers, say, how do you know that the people buying from Amazon are those who have come from Google? You can sort of map it back and see, okay, so how many people came from Google? Look at analytics. How many people clicked on my Amazon links? Okay, cool. Of the people clicking on my Amazon links, what's my CTR? But you may have 90% of the organic traffic clicking on Amazon links and making 10% of the sales, whereas all of them are coming from some external source, community, social media, Reddit, wherever else, and they're making the majority of the sales, and it just kind of skews the results quite a lot. So you have to be very,
I would argue for an Amazon site it's unlikely, but for Authority Hacker, I was just thinking, like, this example is like, if someone bought Authority Hacker, it's typically the example where, like, well, we have SEO traffic and people would like check that out and they'd value that, etc. But if someone took over Authority Hacker, I don't think that courses would sell as much initially, at least, until they've proven themselves to the community, and or affiliate recommendations would convert as high because people trust us because hopefully we've made good enough recommendations in the past, and or called out tools that we think are not valuable, for example, things like that. But like if a completely new face showed up, they would need to earn that trust again. It basically resets to the community, and they probably would be a little bit defiant at the beginning because of that change. Like people tend to be a little bit like that, and so in that aspect, like you couldn't count on making the same volume of like revenue that we make as Authority Hacker if we were not here personally anymore. At least initially, if you do a good job transitioning, it can be doing okay. But like that's when I would like want to leverage us to do transition podcasts, transition videos, etc. Like mix content with us and them, things like that, like that kind of stuff. Don't worry, we're not selling Authority Hacker, but I think it's a good example of something that could happen.
There was actually this happened in the industry. There was a site called Niche Hacks. Which was sold many, many years ago, like 4 or 5 years ago.
Not many years ago, like it's like 3-4 years ago.
Yeah, it was 2017, 2018, wasn't it?
Yeah, maybe. It's like
5 years ago now. We're living in the future, remember? And yeah, the whole transition there, like
that was
the
bad.
community, it wasn't done in the best way, and I think they kind of lost out a bit from there. So yeah, it's difficult to when an owner leaves who's kind of like that face of the company, so it can be a bit difficult.
The funny thing is the owner like never showed his face previously. He was like under this Stuart name and like had a cartoon image basically. Now it's basically the niche site lady of blogs basically, if you guys go on Twitter. Anyway, they could have probably sold the persona. It would be fine because it wasn't the real name of the guy either. So they probably should have continued, because if you look at the site now, they've lost pretty much everything. And they tried pretty hard. Like they did videos and it was okay. And the guy seemed to kind of know what he was doing. But I think it was too much change too fast. Like he tried to make it a brand new company and people didn't buy into this. And yeah, it's quite difficult. So like this is the kind of niches, like also in finance, for example, that would be the case. Like, if you're getting financial advice from people that you're following and then someone else takes over, you're unlikely to buy the stocks they tell you to buy just because they bought the business. So that's a problem. But it's not I think most affiliate sites that get SEO traffic, it's not as big of an issue. I'd just be a little careful.
It's also,
let's talk about
something to consider though when you're starting your own site. If you position it as Mark Webster or GailBreton.com.
Yeah, good luck selling
brand. It's a lot harder than some when you're creating this brand which has its own kind of presence, you know.
But even like Authority Hacker, like reselling Authority Hacker would be very difficult. It would require a multi-year plan or something. We're not planning on that, but like it's still an interesting debate and thought to have that. It's like the way you build this. It's funny, people want authenticity, they want this kind of content, etc., but it also makes it much more difficult to pass on the business and sell it. So it's kind of, you need to find that balance between authenticity and scalability slash passability, like that you can give it to someone else. And it's going to be a different answer for each business, I'd say. But let's jump on to the next point, which is going to be tech stack. So this one is definitely going to apply to most affiliate sites, etc., ad sites that you're going to buy. And that is that most sites that you're going to buy, they're obviously not brand new, right? They tend to be 3, 4, 5 years old. I would say something that would be the majority of the range of sites you would buy that have decent traffic, maybe a little bit less, but most of the time they're built on tech that was released at that time, right? So you're gonna buy the site that's still built on like older page builders, whatever, and or have not been updated in terms of themes, in terms of design, in terms of all of that. And one thing that is not only is going to be costing you in terms of like site speed, etc., but that is something that but quite often if you decide to maintain the site as is, because doing big technical changes can affect your rankings positively or negatively, but you're gambling a bit. You just dropped a lot of money on that site. Do I really want to gamble? Not sure, one of the sites that we sold, like an case study site for TAS, I can see they didn't change anything because of that, because they were afraid of that. But if you maintain that tech stack, quite often you end up with a site a lot more effort to manage. Like uploading a new piece of content could be a lot more work, could take a lot longer. The medias are not optimized. You need to like recut the images yourself, whatever. You can obviously do some changes behind the hood, but quite often it could be quite an issue in terms of like having to retrain your staff as well and to running onto that old tech stack and so on. And that could double the cost of uploading articles, that kind of stuff that could mess up with your calculations of profitability. So I would be a little bit careful, both in changing the tech if the site is ranking well, and in calculations of overheads of running all the tech stacks if you don't want to change it. And it's going to be a balance that you're going to need to find. Personally, I like the idea of like probably running the site for a little bit, putting new content as it is, and then maybe a year, 2 years later, going for a full redesign with new tech and getting up to speed on that stuff. Because let's be honest, every 3-4 years, I think most sites should do a big refresh of their tech stack these days. If otherwise it's costing you in efficiency quite a lot.
And I think it's also worth mentioning that it's rare that you'll find a site that's built well, that's built
the way you want, at least
the way you want it, because most sites, just because they've been for sale for a long period, they've been being built up for 3, 4, 5 years. They're built on older technology. The owners had different ideas about the SEO or the content structure or whatever. So
they're running on Beaver Builder, stuff like that. It's just like these old ones. So yeah, it's tricky. It's more tricky than it sounds, and it's going to affect you more than it sounds. And from selling sites in the past, I can see most people who bought the sites, and many of them were quite experienced, did not dare doing big tech changes, which is quite interesting.
Yeah. So the next thing I want to talk about is the team, and specifically the stability around that. So when a business gets sold and the new owners come in, there's a big point here where you're at a high risk of people leaving. And for most websites who have a small team with a handful of writers, maybe 1 or 2 link builders, 1 or 2 or 3 people leaving can have a pretty catastrophic effect on you continuing the business the way it is. You can always bring in new people, but it's never going to be the same, especially true with writers. So what normally happens is that the buyer and the seller, they work closely together to position this in front of the team, to communicate it, to explain what's going to happen. They come up with a plan, they talk to each other, and try and get everyone's buy-in to the whole sale. But if the seller doesn't have a good relationship with the team, and it's very difficult to know this when you're buying a site in advance, then you can have issues with people leaving or just choosing this point to kind of move on. We had a situation where we sold a site, sold a business, and 6 months down the line, about half the team basically left.
Was gone, yeah.
Yeah,
Even
and
more.
they went and kind of it was all drama, like stole some clients and formed their own business and stuff. We weren't involved in any of
No,
of
we were
that
out, yeah.
at the time. But it just goes to highlight, if you don't get the team on board when you're buying a site, you can lose them initially, or in the months following. So my advice in that situation is just get ahead of it. Speak if you're buying a site, speak to the owner in due diligence, trying to understand their relationship with the team. Try and talk to the team if you can in that phase, like individually, maybe one or two of the writers or any key people, and then get them on board very quickly. Talk
I
to them
think
in early days.
I think empowering them and considering their opinions on what should be done is also quite important. When you come in, you're the owner, but you have less experience of the business than they do. I think respecting them and respecting that goes a long way. And
it also goes along with what you're saying with the tech stack, right? You don't want to go in and just like rip everything up and change everything on day one. The same is true for people. You probably don't want to change the way you're writing content or the processes on day one. Just keep it going as it is. It's been successful so far. And then as you learn the business, you can then start making more and more tweaks and adjustments to it.
Give them an opportunity, if possible, to like advance their position by helping you take over the business properly. I think it can be a win-win situation. Given the potential cost of losing so many people or like having to rebuild a team or whatever, trust me, you're often better off offering, potential bonuses or something like that to someone that would maybe was just a writer or just an editor, but then you can have regular calls about the overall editorial direction of the site and what they think and their feeling on the niche, etc. And I think this consideration to me is very important, both monetary, but also in terms of respect of their experience and giving them credit for where the site got so far and what you got interested in the first place. So that's pretty much you want to add anything on team stability?
No.
Okay, so the next one is links, right? Obviously, we talked about content, we talked about links. Historically, Google doesn't seem to have punished very hard in terms, recently, at least in the recent years, because historically they have, in terms of having bad links, basically. But they seem to be quite good at least ignoring links that they consider irrelevant, that are not matching, like organic links, I would say. And I actually personally suspect, but that's just a suspicion, I don't have data to back it up, that a lot of core updates might be more about links than people make it out to be, and it just be Google just discarding batches of links that don't match what they're looking for. Could be a reason why people go up and go down, etc., and why these big sites tend to keep going up, because they tend to have more real links than like small SEO sites. And I know people are going to challenge that, so I just had a question I wanted to put in there, then we go back to the point, which is, have you been building links to a page for a while and then the rankings haven't moved even though you've been building links for a while? And that would be, for me, a manifestation of Google being quite good at neutralizing links they don't like anymore. But anyway, that can be a problem if you believe that Google could be discarding some of the links to the website. But another problem could be that lots of sites for sale in the marketplaces are supported by PBNs. The problem is, quite often, these owners sell the site, they leave the links for a while, and then 6 months later, they're like, well, I have my other project now, I'd like to use these links. And the more links there is on the PBN, the less powerful it is because of the nature of PageRank, right? It's divided by the number of outgoing links. So they remove these links to the site they sold, then your ranking drops, and you're like, oh shit, actually, what probably wasn't worth the price I paid because you paid for these rankings, really. And these rankings were supported by something that you didn't acquire with the website, so they had the freedom to remove these links, and really you don't have anything to say after the fact. But you have something to say before you buy, and that is the interesting part. So the thing that I would do is I would probably check the website on not just Ahrefs, because you can actually block certain crawlers, especially the Ahrefs bot and the SEMrush bot tend to be blocked by a lot of PBNs. And so the site could be ranking up and you would not even see the links in Ahrefs. They would be invisible to you if you just use these tools. That's when I like to use smaller, cheaper, worse SEO tools to check the website. So like that's kind of the joke that we have internally. That's like the main use of SERPstat. I have that account that I got on AppSumo a while ago, like that lifetime account. And when I want to find PBNs, I tend to use it because nobody blocks SERPstat in their PBNs. And so you tend to see a different picture quite often than what you would see in Ahrefs for sites that use PBNs. And so that's an opportunity for you to find these sites even if they're hidden. And that is a trick for people who sell websites, right? They supported by a PBN blocked on Ahrefs and SEMrush, sell it for a high price, we use these links on the next project, sell it for a high price, we use these links on the next project, and end up just gathering more value than they probably should because they remove the part that is valuable to your site. So once you find these, you can go during the vetting process, you can go and ask about these, and you can either acquire them with the site, like quite often these are sold as a package deal, but they might not be sold as a package deal if you don't bring it up. So it's up to you to find them. Or you can have a contract with the guy to maintain these links, or have him replace them and then see if the rankings stay and then whatever. But basically you need to negotiate here, or you can just negotiate a lower price, I guess. You can just say, well, look, these rankings are here from these links are not part of the package, I want a big discount, or I'm not interested, and walk out, basically. But I think you need to be quite careful, because that's probably one of the most common things that could be deceiving in the sale of a website. Like, the content is there, right? It's up to you to go and browse the website. But the links can be hidden quite well, and you need to go and dig for that. So be very careful, use multiple tools to check the links, and negotiate based on your findings.
And I think if you're maybe more new to this and you might have a harder time kind of understanding good and bad links, then just ask someone, hire a link builder to do a consultation to help you run through this. There are due diligence companies out there that specialize in buyer side due diligence to help you understand these kind of SEO things. I haven't used any of them personally. They have. I've been on the receiving end when they've done due diligence on us, and they're generally pretty thorough. But I don't know how far they go in terms of looking at stuff they can't find on Ahrefs or hidden PBNs or anything like that.
Yeah, I would really do that. Like if I spent like hundreds of thousands on the site, like buy a month on multiple tools and do it.
Okay.